Killian.
Thanks, Daniel, and thanks everybody for joining. Really looking forward to today's webinar. Delighted that we have our business partner Aligne here to share their expertise. And today we're going to be covering, how you can future-proof your GRC framework. So really looking forward to today's webinar. But I suppose before I hand over to Amit and Denis, one question I have, we're going to be focusing on the future today. From your point of view, what does the present look like as far as GRC is concerned?
Good. Thanks, Killian. Thanks for the introduction. Always a pleasure to be working with IBM. I think if we look at GRC today, it's become a really interesting discipline. Non-financial risk, by which I mean operational risk, IT and cyber, third-party model risk, etc. It's become a really big discipline. And it's understandable because I think for many organizations, non-financial risk is actually a far bigger risk than financial risk, where organizations have put a lot of effort in the past around credit risk, market risk, etc. But I think non-financial risk has grown very significant over the last couple of decades. But I think it's a very fragmented discipline. I think what we've seen is those sorts of areas I've talked about, operational risk, financial control, model risk, etc. They've grown as external forces, regulatory requirements have demanded, and in many ways they've become quite siloed. So I think what you see is within a lot of organizations, you see those kind of separate and independent operational risk, IT and cyber, operational resilience, etc., being quite separate and independent within organizations and not joined up. And I think that's probably the defining factor as you look at the discipline today. Amit, what's your view on that?
Yeah, Dennis, I agree with you. I think there are a lot of challenges today, and it is there for a reason. I think a lot of companies have and organizations have evolved over a period of time in terms of growing their GRC framework, growing their GRC programs over the number of years that we have been in the industry. And between the two of us, probably we've covered about 50 odd years in the GRC space, right? So I think it's a great opportunity for us to close to this particular industry and understand very, very closely, you being on both the client side as well as from the vendor side, me as well, and from both the angles. I think it's great to cover that aspect. And I think what we have seen, and I agree with you, it's a lot of companies still have their GRC programs in various different silos due to various different reasons. They may have their own reasons. And what we are also seeing currently is a lot of people are looking at the current environment. A lot of people are looking at how do we diversify? How do we make sure that we combine all of these programs and get some good insights into how the organization is functioning, how we are growing as an organization. But it is there for a reason. But Dennis, why do you think we are in this particular state where all the programs are in siloed? I mean, they are not they're not integrated together. Why do you think that?
Yeah, and I think in a lot of cases, it's just because of the way that the nature of the discipline has developed. A lot of the drivers around operational risk and financial control are probably where a lot of organizations started. And, depending on whether you were financial services sector or not, would maybe determine how that was developed as well. If you're in the banking and financial services industry, a lot of what you were doing in the first instance would have been driven by Basel, by kind of understanding your operational losses, how they might drive your capital requirements, etc., etc. So that was kind of a big driver. Whereas for the rest of the world, a lot of it was driven by SOX. So again, we're talking early 2000s when SOX came out, also early 2000s when a lot of the Basel requirements were hitting organizations. So I think that's how the sort of primary, say, operational risk, financial control stuff developed. But I think you had other drivers for other teams within organizations developing IT control and cyber. You have compliance teams looking at either regulatory compliance, policy compliance. You had, specialist quant teams developing model risk. And what you'd see is each team had a set of requirements. They had something they needed to deliver for the organization. They had something needed to comply with, and they've made decisions based on what their domain is, with nobody really looking at that as one connected discipline and thinking, actually, from an organizational point of view, what do I need to deliver? So it's not that anybody's really done anything wrong in their initial decision making. They've had a need, they've developed a solution to the need. But I think what we're seeing over time is a realization about just how connected these domains are, right? I mean, how do you assess IT controls today without understanding the third party impact of that? With the huge dependence we might have on hyperscalers or significant IT vendors or, and outsourced services. How do you look at business processes and controls without considering IT risk? I mean, I've been working for over 30 years and I can't remember any process that wasn't significantly dependent on IT in that time. So, how do you think about your sort of process risk control stuff without understanding the impact of IT? And I think there's been, I think, a much stronger realization across companies that actually they do need to do that. They do need to think about the interconnected risk disciplines and how they affect each other to get a better picture. So, I think that's why we've had the siloing, but I think what we're seeing is a recognition in the marketplace that like a more integrated risk management approach is required. And I guess, Amit, I know, your previous career in IBM and Open Pages, I think you'll be pleased at how Open Pages has developed as a solution for integrated risk management.
Absolutely, 100%. And OpenPage does provide those from a solution from a system perspective as well, but more from a subject perspective, from a GRC domain perspective. I think I agree with you. The field has evolved, the silos have evolved. I think what you're saying is being more integrated. But what do you think from your perspective the advantages? You mentioned a couple of them around being when you have your IT systems, and then that impacts without considering the third party risk, you get a perspective on that. But from looking at the future, we discussed where we are today from this perspective. But looking at the future, where do you think and how do you think companies can overcome these challenges?
Yes, so I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to recognizing how risk impacts you as a business. I think in the past, what we've also seen is the risk domain being dominated by second line, if you like. I mean, people are familiar with the 3 lines of defense type approach. So what you kind of get is the subject matter experts driving how risk is done within organizations and, understanding the requirements that need to be met, et cetera, but it can sometimes be a bit disconnected from the business. And I think, across my career, I've seen 2 main groups of people that tend to understand risk really well. One group is well-trained risk professionals, and the other is, senior first-line executives. And the reason they understand risk quite well, even if they don't necessarily use the same language to describe it, is they're the people who are impacted by risk, the people that are accountable for, that have their lives on the line, if you like, professionally for making sure that the things that keep them awake at night are dealt with. And I think what we need to see is something that sort of more speaks the language of the business, because If you're going to understand the impact of risk on an organization, it has to be business led. And I think that's what often leads us to talking about process, because people who lead business units or country heads, etc., they understand how business processes affect their accountability. They understand how their business operates. And if you want to give them the context for how risk is presenting within their business, how you get that holistic view of risk, the risk profile they have against their risk appetite, then you need to put a process lens on that. Whereas I think often we can talk in a very sort of academic way about risk. I come from a consulting background, so I have a bit of that second line bias myself. But I think, having sort of interacted with a lot of first line people, you do sort of see how they need to talk about things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think, and given the times post-COVID, I think process lens is also very, very important to understand that, okay, how do we proceed, and more from business resiliency perspective as well, because then when you have your business services, when you have your basically all offerings that you're tracking, and it's all about your process, how you run your process, how well you run the process. Do you want to make sure that, okay, you are taking into account all the risks, all the aspects that impact that particular process, whether it's from an IT systems, your third parties, your even models, your AI that you're using, and AI, we'll switch to AI pretty soon. But I think it's important, all the more important now with the changing times, where there are huge impacts to your processes with technology, with the current geopolitical climate as well. The resilience, business resiliency is all the more important, wherein process lens becomes, I'm not saying or proposing that, okay, that's the only lens, but that it's a very, very important lens to have when you look at your risk and compliance management, because as a whole, it actually fits in quite well, and you can actually get a state of your organization in a dashboard if you want to. And this is where Open Pages can definitely step in as well, because as an integrated system, Open Pages can bring in all of those elements. Again, OpenPages is one of the systems, but there are many other systems that it may help, but OpenPages is one good system, an industry leading system that can demonstrate that. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think certainly if you look at the requirements around operational resilience, particularly in the financial sector, we're seeing a lot of regulatory pressure over the last few years. And obviously we do a lot of work with banks, but it's not the entirety of our world, and sometimes it's easy to forget that. But certainly with the banks, you have been seeing the PRA and other regulators looking for those banks to have understood how their important business services, their critical infrastructure functions actually are controlled and how well they operate. I think you're seeing the emergence of legislation like DORA with a strong focus on operational resilience, albeit for the financial sector. And I think that takes you to a process way of looking at things, because in the end of the day, important business services, they are a type of process. And I think organizations that haven't traditionally had a process way of looking at things have got a lot to adapt to, because in reality, you can meet the needs of those sort of first line stakeholders and the regulators by pivoting to process, although it won't necessarily be easy to do. But I think, it's easy to forget sometimes when you work with banks a lot that kind of the rest of the world does do things by process, because that sort of SOX-based approach to risk management is a process-based approach, right? You start off by looking at which are the significant processes that are impacting your financial statements. And if you've started from there, then extending that into additional types of risks, it's less difficult than moving from that, if you like, that event-based way of looking at risk rather to a process-based way. So, yeah, I mean, it is quite interesting. And as you say, AI is going to be really important in all of this, because AI is permeating a lot of business processes, and it's going to be another risk that does have to be addressed. And a process way of looking at things is, a very very handy way of doing that.
So do you see companies relooking at their risk management framework so that they can adapt? Are you seeing that in the market more and more now? I'm certainly seeing more and more companies looking at an integrated sort of a way of handling their risk management and compliance management. So, but from a process lens, do you think that companies have to relook at their processes given the challenges that we have?
Yeah, I think they do. And it's something I've been seeing as a trend for several years. So certainly I've seen some clients several years back actually looking at their frameworks and their supporting infrastructure and going, actually, how can we simplify? And I think if you go back to sort of the early post-COVID time, a lot of organizations under cost pressure, et cetera, and there was a bit of a lever there. And I've seen a couple of customers come and go, oh my goodness, I've got like 6 GRC systems. They've got overlapping functionality. Why is that the case? And yes, you can simplify the number and rationalize the number of systems you have and save money, but actually step back from that and say, you have 6 systems because you've got 6 frameworks and 6 siloed teams. So how do you then start to integrate that and have that more coherent view across the organization? And I've definitely seen some organizations adapt and make that change. I've seen some very large customers talking about how they change their frameworks around. I think some of them very daunted by the prospect and realizing just how much work it is, how much of a culture change it will be for the organization, how many people they need to retrain to be able to do it that way. So I think that there's, I think there are very few organizations that are not looking at it. And one of the, I think one of the underlying reasons for that is, yes, there's regulatory pressure. Yes, there's operational efficiencies to be had, but actually, as I said earlier, non-financial risks become a very large domain. But the incidents and events keep happening, right? Large organizations are still getting fined. Barclays was fined significantly this week. Not that long ago, Silicon Valley Bank collapsed fundamentally due to failings in risk management. And these stories keep occurring again and again and again. So despite all the effort going into those organizations around risk management, the number of people that are involved, the spend that's happening, the events still happen. And in many cases, that's due to failings in frameworks and not being joined up.
And now there's a new beast that is coming in. There's the transformational change that is happening with all of us, to be honest, with AI coming into the picture, and it being posing more challenges than we all can handle, to be honest. And it's a new kind of risk that we all need to grapple with, right? And organizations are struggling, and I agree with you that not by being siloed may not help. We need an integrated approach. We need an integrated approach to handling their data. Where is the data? Where are the different silos of data? We need to understand where and how we manage that data, and should we bring all of that together to get the coherent analysis that we need to get from the data that we
Yeah.
already have. But we also, there is other challenges as well. With data comes responsibility. It
Yep.
also comes with challenges, because data in its current form, with a lot of organizations that you and I are working on, the data is not that great, and
Yeah.
they need to fix it as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In so many things, whatever you try and do is only as good as the data you have, right?
Exactly,
I-
exactly.
and I think this takes us quite nicely on to one of the most obvious things if we're talking about the future of GRC, right, which is AI.
Absolutely.
And I think you can't go onto any um, professional website or LinkedIn without just seeing AI posts here, there, and everywhere. But it's understandable. It is a sort of transformational change that's coming, and I think it does have a huge impact on GRC. But a topic that probably I defer to you a lot of the time, Amit. So, what's your view on how AI is impacting GRC?
I think AI is going to be transformational, as it is with other sort of industries that we are seeing on a day-to-day basis. We see a lot of AI frauds. There are a lot of impersonations. AI is helping immensely on productivity side as well. For a lot of companies, AI comes with a lot of advantages, a lot of productivity gains, efficiency gains. That's a big play for AI, but there's a flip side to that as well. It also poses with a lot of challenges, because, as I mentioned earlier, AI is great when it functions properly. When it's great when it helps you, but it also poses challenges as well. But purely from a GRC perspective, if you think positively around AI and you say that, okay, AI is going to help me, in what ways, right? So we have seen number of things, and we've been working on this industry, and I personally have been involved with a lot of AI research, and we are doing our own development as well. And with IBM, being an ex-IBMer, IBM has spent number of years on AI as well, and kind of like pioneers in the industry anyways. So I
Yeah, I
think
think people forget that sometimes, just
people
how
forget
long
that. Exactly.
IBM's been in the AI space. I mean, you go back to, Deep Blue beating
Yeah,
Kasparov and before. I mean, this is decades
exactly.
ago. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we understand and appreciate there are a lot of mundane activities within GRC that happen on a regular basis, on a continuous basis. Look at controls monitoring. You need to do continuous controls monitoring over a period of time. There are lots of things you need to do. Risk assessments, control assessments all the time. So and there's the big question mark about second line review, because when you talk about reviews, the coverage that second line can provide, they are already stretched with their activities, their day-to-day activities. Where will they have the time to provide the coverage? They may have sampling, and we were talking about audit earlier, right? In
Hmm.
terms of audit providing that capability and oversight over a period of time. But audit, the most prevalent method is sampling, and you being an ex-auditor, you
Yeah.
you can attest to that. But AI certainly can provide that sort of overall coverage and overall capabilities. From my perspective, AI is a great analytics tool. It can provide the capability of analysis and making sure it, if you give the right data to AI, it can give you great results, and results that you may not have thought about
Yeah.
in your day-to-day, in your normal risk and compliance management activities. It can give you great insights into your data without you exerting too much effort into it.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where I see AI being advantageous. But as I said, the flip side is, how do you manage the risks associated with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I kind of echo what you're just saying. I mean, as you rightly say, I started my career in audit, And I think back to forming opinions on multi-billion pound companies based on like a sample of 15 transactions and so on. It's almost laughable. Yes, there's statistical basis for audit firms to do that and have things stand up in court and so on. But I think we're moving to a place. I think we've had this nirvana talked about for many years about continuous monitoring of controls. 100% coverage in areas and so on. Do you think that AI is finally going to deliver on that?
Some people may agree. Some people may think that yes, AI can deliver, and I'm not saying it will deliver. All I'm trying to say is getting there. It's not perfect. It's as you said, is as good as your data. So I think the first step people have to do, companies have to do, is get their data right and make sure that once your data is correct, it's in a better shape, it's in a good shape. The results will flow. But it also depends on many other factors. I think there needs to be a cultural shift in organizations wherein the leadership has to understand what does it mean for them to implement AI and adopt AI. And there are lots of aspects where you may say that, okay, AI will bring in the productivity gains, but at what cost? I think that cost benefit analysis has to be done for all organizations, right? And I think leadership has to be engaged. They have to be educated on how to adopt AI. Where is it going? And what is the sort of governance that they need to build in place to make sure you're managing AI properly in a structured way without any and overcome those challenges, right? That's where all the foundational models come in picture, and that's where the whole ethical and responsible AI also comes in picture, right? Because then companies can if they can adopt AI responsibly, it actually is only going to benefit them. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we know that for many organizations dealing with the public, dealing with their customers, trust is absolutely paramount. And I think as we move through that AI journey, it is about establishing trust. You mentioned a couple of things there just in terms of how AI manifests itself as a risk. And I think as we were talking the other day about essentially about how AI governance is almost one more component of non-financial risk that needs to be considered to give that holistic view. I know you've done a lot of work with customers around AI governance policies and so on. What's your view on where businesses are in relation to AI governance? What place are people at in their journey, and are people realizing how essential AI governance is?
I think people are trying the what we are saying, what I'm saying right now is every client, every single person has a different definition of what is AI governance, right?
True.
I think that is something that we are seeing, or at least I'm seeing that in the market, where just by having some guardrails in place is not just governance. It's not the only governance. It is part of governance. It is part of how you govern AI or control AI, but that is not the entire governance suite. What it would mean is from an AI governance, you need to understand what use cases you have, what models you're using, how you're using those models, what data is going into those models, how is is there a traceability, is there transparency of those models as well, and are you taking into account the entire governance around your use cases, your approval process, your validation of your models, understanding Are you testing your models properly? Are you testing all the scenarios that you are when you have an actual scenario or actual real life use case? Are you taking your models and use cases through that stress test as well? Because then once you have all of those, you can actually prove as a test bed. Of course, in real life situations will be different, but you will have to first test your initial scenarios and then move forward with the actual implementation of those. And even while implementation, you have to real time test those use cases and those models. Are they performing correctly? Right? Again, sampling and data forms the core of it. And behind the scenes, it's the interconnected. So we talked about initially about the interconnected nature of GRC, right?
Yeah.
Behind the scenes, it's all about how this data is interconnected, right?
Mm-hmm.
So your third party risk, your audits, your IT assets, your IT controls, your models, all of those are interconnected. That interconnected piece, interconnected data forms the core of how AI can help you. And that's where I think from a GRC standpoint, that's the core of um, how I see GRC will evolve over a period of time, because then that's something that we can leverage as data and as professionals and risk professionals, we can get better analytics from it.
Yeah, and I think obviously that can easily lead through to helping us understand better within a business process context how AI is impacting those processes, what decisions are being made, what risks result from that, and therefore what sort of controls need to be in place. So again,
Absolutely.
yeah, as part of that whole interconnected, holistic view on risk, again lending itself to that process way of looking at things. And I think one of the things you're right in terms of saying that every customer seems to have a different view of what AI governance is, and the reality is potentially all of them are right. You know, because the domain is actually quite broad. There's a lot of capabilities that
Yes.
are required within an AI governance framework. Yes, you need to maintain an inventory of models and be able to link it to business processes and risks and controls and so on. You need to understand what the use cases are. You need to have your approval cycles, but you need to manage the operation of those models. You need to be monitoring how
Absolutely
they're
right.
operating, getting the feedback loop. You need to be putting the controls in place, making
Yes,
sure you've
of
got
course.
the right guardrails. So actually um, what I see with many of our customers is they're looking at one slice of that mm, capability model, if you like, and not seeing the whole picture. And I think the other thing I'm seeing as a trend, and I'm sure you'll agree, is a lot of customers knowing that they should be doing something around AI governance, but not quite knowing where to start or what the next
Yeah,
steps are.
yeah. I think it's that's a great question actually, because one of the good parts about being in the GRC field is we have been trained on governance, right? And those principles, the base principles, that they don't change in case of AI governance as well, because you still need to go through, still need to go through documentation, you still need to go through a review and approval process, you still need to make sure you're testing things properly at the given point in time. You're assessing, you're going through your assessment cycles, your review cycles. All of those principles still apply. So when you're talking about AI governance, it's actually governance in the context of how you manage and use AI in your organization, right? It's and the great starting point would be education, right? And making sure all the stakeholders, right from the data scientists, the model reviewers, model developers, and all the way to the leadership team, all of them have to be on the same page. Because if they are not
Yeah,
on the same page, and if all the stakeholders don't, there's no buy-in from all the stakeholders, it's going to be a problem, because people will go off on their own on their own and figure out different things. And it's not an integrated approach in that sense. And
Yeah.
bringing them on the same table, the same page, is one of the biggest challenges that we are facing right now. But how do we make sure that they are on the same page, right? I think a couple of things we can do is we can have a sort of a have a single model, single use case. We can try it out, test it out in a controlled environment where we can say that, okay, let's go ahead with testing this model or this particular use case and take it through a governance lifecycle, and let's see how it performs. And
Yep.
and in fact, what's next governance, which is a great IBM offering, and probably one of the very, very few offerings in this space. It actually helps us to model this sort of a use case as a test bed forward, and this will bring in at least, if not everyone on the same page, but at least they will get an introduction of what sort of governance principles that they need to follow, what sort of responsible AI and ethical AI standards that we need to follow, and what are the regulatory and policy implications for them. I think it will give them an overall perspective of how governance or AI governance program runs or should run in their specific organizations, because every organization is different, but the base principles remain the same.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right there, Amit. The IBM offering is kind of unique in the marketplace at the moment in terms of giving you that governance framework, but with integrated monitoring, the ability to manage those sort of use cases end to end and understand how things are performing, integrate it back with your broader risk management activity. And actually, I think it sits well with a lot of the work we've been doing within Aligne, some of the work we've been doing around guardrail controls and so on, because I think, managing the governance lifecycle and the model monitoring is one thing, but I think, yeah, so you're doing that, but you also need to control it, right? So I think a lot of the
Exactly.
work we're doing around controls is actually really important. I think there's a lot of developments in that space, and I think is a really exciting area.
100%. And one of the questions I'm seeing on the chat is, why do you need to? Why do companies need to undertake an AI governance program? It's a great question. It's more around, it's a need of the hour as well, because then if you're not governing AI, it may very well soon govern you as well, right? So it's actually high time that organizations need to look at it. There is again a lot of implementations and um, lot of aspects in the organization. A lot of teams are working on different AI projects. Now, a lot of people, they don't know about, the leadership is not aware of where AI is being used. Gathering that inventory itself is a big challenge. And last week we had a chat with a client who are struggling with that, and they have a special program around it. Okay, where is AI being used in the organization? And 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 that's a good start, but that's something that has to be controlled, and make sure that when we use AI, it has to be used in a structured way.
Yeah, and I think we, whilst we still see some companies that are saying, "Oh, we're not really using AI," I think companies that say they're not using AI are deluding themselves at the moment, because
Agreed.
if you're not explicitly developing AI use cases yourself, well, fine. But you know what? Your employees have probably started using things like ChatGPT and equivalents are generating material using AI tools. Your IT vendors are using AI. Your third parties are using AI. So, whether you like it or not, AI is happening to you, whether you're controlling it or not. I think on the sort of previous question, in terms of doing the AI stuff for regulatory compliance. Actually, from my opinion, has always been that any risk management activity that's done for compliance is only sort of meeting bare minimum requirements. In the end of the day, risk management should benefit an organization, because risk is not just about managing things down to zero and eliminating risks. Because if you don't take risk, you don't have opportunity, and you don't grow, and you don't generate profitability. The trick with risk is about maximizing the upside. It's about understanding the risk appetite that you have and understanding the risk profile that results from the way you operate. So it's about making conscious risk decisions, and benefiting from it, not just about complying with things and managing, mitigating risks. Yeah, sure, that's part of your framework, but it shouldn't be the driver for it. It should be a byproduct.
Yeah, and regulators are taking different views on this, right? So every single, I mean, EU AI Act has been a great sort of a starter. Yeah. I won't say it's perfect, but it's a starter, so that it provides the base framework for all other regulations across the board. With a lot of countries are trying their hand at regulating AI and making sure there is a perspective of from a compliance or from a regulator standpoint. But I think sometimes and organizations have to understand all of these regulatory obligations that they have to meet, right? And I think a lot of countries are taking different approaches, and EU AI Act is at the moment, as we speak, is the gold standard. If not, if you want to consider it that way, it may be a controversial statement, but but I think it's important to understand then the nuances of that act and the adoption of that act across the board. What we are seeing, especially in the GCC market, is also an adoption of EU Act as a base, and then a lot of regulators in the Saudi region or UAE or other countries in the region, they are trying to adopt these as well, quite aggressively at the moment, because even India, Japan, of course, US and UK have their some principle-based approach, risk-based approaches as well. So I think it's important for us, all of us, to understand as risk professionals, what are the regulatory obligations clients have to face, organizations have to face as well.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm conscious of time, Amit. I think we probably need to go to Q&A shortly, but I've got one, I guess, final question for you about the use of AI in GRC processes. So I'm thinking of a piece of work that you and I were involved in a couple of years back with one of the major banks, and it kind of, I think it showed the need for data quality. So if you look at how banks record internal events are very important for looking at risk management. They directly impact your capital reporting, et cetera, but actually frequently they're done by people, they're recorded by people who interact with the system infrequently, that maybe fully don't know what they're doing, and then they come in, they're presented with a form, they fill it to the best of their ability, but actually it can lead to data quality not being great. How do you see AI actually helping you with data quality when it comes to scenarios like that?
Actually, it's a great question, because data quality, as we discussed earlier as well, data forms the key for every organization, no matter just for AI, but just to get analytics from it, right? Now, if the data is not good, has a lot of sensitive information, for example. So if you're logging an event or typing in free text, there are a lot of chances that as a user, if you don't have guidance, or even if you have guidance, you will make mistakes. You will add sensitive information in that particular free form text. I think in our use case, what we did was we extracted all of this information, and we made sure that at real time, at the point of entry, AI can detect what the user is typing, what the user is entering. If that contain sensitive information. For example, if you have credit card information or a personally identifiable information, even for a banking use case, if you have, say, you're dealing with sanctioned countries, and if you log something around sanctioned countries, it should be flagged immediately. If in a free form text, if it's in a system where you're documenting all of this, you don't have quality control over your data, then it creates more problems downstream rather than upstream. So if you capture this upstream at the point of entry, and this is the use case that we developed for a client, a large client, where they had to deal with this on a day-to-day basis, and there were a lot of post remediation actions and resources and time that they have to spend. We got rid of all of that and made sure that at the point of entry, the data that goes into the system is good enough so that you can get great analytics and it conforms to what the organization needs.
Yeah.
So it was a great use case for that.
Okay, and I guess as a follow-on to that, I mean, the use case we're sort of talking about there is really a sort of machine learning use case, if you like.
Yes.
I think we're seeing a lot of focus around Gen AI. How do you think Gen AI helps in your GRC processes? What benefits could organizations use from infusing some Gen AI in those sorts of processes?
Yeah, again, so taking this example a little bit further, Gen AI can help craft that response, craft that description in a coherent fashion. It can actually guide the end users to say that, okay, you need to document your event and capture who, what, when, where, how sort of questions in terms of documenting the description. And if it doesn't contain any of those, AI can flag the completeness of that particular event. Also, it can guide the end user, and it can guide the end user in a sense that it can connect to external sources, looking at the current sort of technological advances like agentic AI, looking at all of those where we can say that, okay, an event can be logged, can be automatically, we can gather information from external sources, and it will only help the end user. Again, you may ask another question, Dennis, that, okay, will that make people's job redundant, right?
Yeah.
That's a real danger, and that may happen. And in fact, one of the discussions I had just this week actually with a client actually, and they mentioned when we demonstrated these use cases, they mentioned that, okay, will our jobs go as a risk professional? My answer and my thoughts around that was, um, some of the jobs will definitely go, of course, but I think it's more around how it's basically enhancing our jobs. It's
Yeah.
making us more thoughtful around what we are trying to do. AI can do a lot of mundane jobs, a lot of analytical tasks, but actually,
Yeah.
it's the decision making on or that we have to make ourselves. We're talking about a lot of self-driving cars and all the insurance
Yeah.
aspect around it as well. But I think it's important we are conscious of that.
I agree, and I think in our discipline, yes, you're right. Some jobs may go, some tasks may be replaced with technology, but we've been doing that for decades. Yes, AI is transformational, and it may have a bigger impact than other technologies. But I kind of come back to some of the problems we've been facing in the domain over the last number of years, which is people are drowning in volume. Um, uh, Organizations have second line teams that are not large enough to consider the thousands and thousands of, say, medium risks that are recorded in the system, and therefore unable to determine, well, maybe some of those should be high, right? I think
Yeah, of course.
you're not able to look at the 100% data quality. You're only able to review the highest priority stuff. And if the prioritization's wrong, you miss things. So I go back to my example as an auditor of forming opinions based on a sample of 15 transactions. I think you're coming into things where you're now going to be able to look at things far more comprehensively, highlight the anomalies, highlight the things that don't fit a pattern, but highlight the things that don't meet some broad guidelines, and they be able to look at those 100%. And I think, in the right hands, that it's a powerful tool, and I think it will be a real enabler. But in all likelihood, with any transformational technology, the journey is going to be a bit bumpy, and there will be winners and there will be losers. But I think overall, I think it creates opportunities rather than eliminating people. So, fingers crossed.
Yes, great. I think if there are no more questions, I think we had a great discussion, Dennis. I think it a lot of insights, a lot of great points that we discussed, and I think it's a great session to have. I hope the audience also liked it. We hope to continue and do more of these in the future.
Yeah. Thanks, Amit. It was a good chat.
Yeah.
Thank you, Denis. Amit. Brilliant discussion. I suppose one question I have is, obviously there was a huge amount of context discussed today. What would you say are the key takeaways for the audience to take back to their organizations?
So for me, I think it's about organizations going back and thinking about how do we look at risk holistically. And actually, probably a point we didn't cover today, it's actually about how are you giving senior stakeholders within organizations good information about their risk profile, how it compares with appetite, what the exceptions are, what the things are they need to look into. I think we generate a lot of data within organizations that's very second line led, very reg reporting led, but I think we're not always giving good enabling data for business leaders to make decisions about how they operate their business. So I think for me, that's one of the big takeaways.
Yeah, and similar lines actually, Killian. From my perspective, because I deal with data and I deal with AI quite a lot, getting data to the right person at the right time, and getting sound analytics from it, no matter what, and that will drive to better decision making at the end, because that's something that a lot of companies are struggling with. One, they don't have access to data. If they have access, they are not sure about the quality of data. If the quality of data is there, they may not get that information at the right time. I think all of that needs to come together to have a better decision making for organizations, and for them to be more resilient in today's times, where all the things that are happening around us, resiliency is the key. And if you are resilient, then you'll have a success.
Brilliant. Sounds like there could be 2 topics for our next discussion.
Many, yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Sure, definitely.
I think there definitely is a lot we can talk about in this domain, and I think that's why we've been starting to put out a lot more material, whether that's on LinkedIn or via our website. I think people who want to reach out to us and discuss further, then contact details are on the website, aligne.ai, and yeah, we'd be more than happy to continue the conversation with anybody that wants to.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Denis and Amit. Really appreciate your time today, and thanks everybody for joining. We're going to close down the webinar now, but of course, if anybody has any further questions, don't hesitate to contact either Denis, Amit, or myself, and we'll be happy to help. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.